Friends, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our program tonight. This is a very special evening tonight because we're joined by Scott Ritter for a talk about Russia, Ukraine, NATO current events, very serious current events that we're all very concerned about. We're going to hear about Scott's books, Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika and Scorpion King. As you've seen already, for people who are here with us live, we have a table back there where people can purchase copies of Scott books, which he'll be signing. So the format of tonight's event is Scott will be giving a talk, a discussion, and after that, we'll do a Q&A. And after that, we will do the book signing. So thank you again, everyone, so much for joining us. I'm very excited for today's program. We're joined here by a live audience and also about 200-300 people on Zoom, along with whoever's streaming live, if the live stream is working. So we're very excited for today's program. We're here at the Community Church of Boston, okay? And this is a pretty historic institution, a peace and justice congregation since 1920. This building has been here for 100 years. And in the last 100 years, it's had a pretty remarkable history. Dr. Martin Luther King spoke with this institution, Rosa Parks, W.E.B. Du Bois, and what was perhaps the most monumental speech a couple of weeks ago delivered by yours truly. So no, just kidding. The illustrious history and tradition of this church is better continued tonight by our guest, Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter, as many of you know, he's a Marine, a former Marine, and UN's weapons inspector. He's an expert on Russian affairs, military affairs, geopolitics. Many of you have been following him, some for the last few months and many others for the last many years. So we're very excited to have Scott Ritter here tonight. Scott, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I didn't realize I was speaking in a venue with such a storied history. I was confident coming here. Now I'm a little nervous because those are big shoes to fill. But again, it's a privilege to be here. You know, what's on everybody's mind right now, of course, is the conflict in Ukraine, and you know, I've been labeled a number of things when it comes to this. I've been called a Russian propagandist. I've been called an information terrorist. I am a war criminal. Now, this is all according to the Ukrainian government. This may be a Ukrainian assassin here trying to kill me with the microphone, but I'm on a hit list. You know, I'm marked for assassination. I'm not too worried about that, but it is what it is. It's a real hit list. People do die. So I'm just going to calm you down right now. I'm not a Russian propagandist. I'm not an information terrorist. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm not a little bit closer either. You know, international humanitarian law being what it is, and statute of limitations, and the fact that I've been to war, who knows? But I think I did it right. But when it comes to this conflict, taking a side is a problem. You see, when you look at a conflict, very few people can just step back and say, I am 100% neutral on this one. Now, in theory, I should be. I'm an American. I don't care about other people's fights, to be honest with you. I'm more worried about keeping my country out of fights. And if we can keep my country out of fights, we have a tendency to avoid creating problems in the world that affect my country. That's my number one priority. That doesn't mean that I don't have a heart and a soul and that, you know, I don't bleed inside when I see other people suffering. I do. I'm just not somebody who believes that America is the world's policeman and that we should be going out telling other people what to do, how to do, and when to do it. That being said, on the Russian-Ukraine conflict, as an American, I can't be an impartial observer because my country has taken a side. And I'm not taking the side, let's talk about taking a side right now. We made this conflict possible. We're the ones. There, we got issue. You need me to speak louder or to the mic like this? Okay, I can do that. Just don't want to knock my teeth out, but It's okay. I'm 61. Who cares? My point is, my government has taken a side. And it's not the side that we're, the issue that we're funding Ukraine today and supporting Ukraine politically and diplomatically, et cetera. We started this war. We're the ones responsible for this conflict. And our responsibility goes back to the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Now, we'll be talking about that a little bit. I wrote a book that touches on this, Disarmament, the Time of Perestroika. But the fact of the matter is, when the Soviet Union, or when the Warsaw Pact collapsed in 1989, 1990, there was discussions going on about what's going to happen in the post-Cold War environment. What's the role of NATO? What's the role of the Warsaw Pact? How does Germany reunify? People tend to forget today that Germany was an occupied country. And there's a reason why Germany was an occupied country. And that used to be called Nazi Germany. And they fought a war against the United States, the Soviet Union, and others, and we won. And when we won, we said no more Nazis. We occupied their country and we denazified them, or we tried to, or didn't we try to? I don't know. Werner von Braun got us to the moon. So, hey, we didn't try that hard. But the point is, we pretended to be anti-Nazi, and we said never again. But what we didn't do is finalize it. There was no peace treaty. No peace treaty. And you know who'd been asking for a peace treaty for all this time, for the decades of occupation? The Soviets. They're saying, we need to finalize the German issue. We would like to see a unified Germany, but we don't want to see a militarized Germany. We don't want to see a militarized, industrialized Germany. We need to have guarantees that this will never happen again. 27 million reasons why they didn't want it to happen again. And that's the number of Soviet citizens who lost their lives in the conflict against Nazi Germany. But in 1990, the Soviets were saying, hey, what can we do to make this dissolution work? We don't want it to devolve. We don't want it to become a problem. We don't want violence. We have 400,000 troops in East Germany occupying it because they lost the war, and the war ain't over till there's a peace treaty. But to get a peace treaty, we have to be certain that you're not going to take advantage of this, you being the United States and NATO. That if Germany is unified, NATO won't expand. And Gorbachev was given assurance after assurance after assurance. Then Secretary of State James Baker spoke with Shevardnadze, spoke with Gorbachev. The German leader spoke with Shevardnadze, Gorbachev. The French leader, all the leaders spoke, and they all said the same thing: not 1 inch eastward. NATO will not expand 1 inch eastward. And so the Soviets left Germany. A peace treaty was negotiated and signed. Germany became unified, and instantly the United States lied. James Baker came back from his meeting with Gorbachev, met with the National Security Council and said, hey, I told the guy not 1 inch eastward. And they went, why? Why would you tell him that? We're going all the way, buddy. We're going all the way. You see, the United States had a policy about post-Soviet the political existence. We never wanted Russia to rise up and challenge us the way that the Soviet Union did. We wanted to keep Russia down. And the best way to keep Russia down would be to expand NATO, gobbling up all those former Soviet bloc countries right up to the border of Russia, and then work in this post-Soviet reality to destabilize Russia economically. Ask yourself why Russia was such a nutcase in the 1990s. Now, a lot of people say, Gorbachev, yeah, he bears responsibility. But Yeltsin, yep, he was an alcoholic and a horrible leader. But it was the United States leading the charge, going in there with our capitalism and our democracy. And we didn't have capitalism. Capitalism is supposed to be about the economy governed by something that resembles the rule of law. This was outright robbery, theft, pillaging. We were robbing them blind. We empowered a handful of people to become billionaires, and then we allowed them to take their billions out to our banks, while we also stripped Russia of everything of value. Who suffered? The Russian people, and they suffered egregiously. Anybody who lived during that time will tell you it was the worst thing in their memory since the end of the Second World War. It was horrible, and we did it. We're to blame. And we did it on purpose. It wasn't by accident. Our goal was to get Russia to break up, to get Russia to fragment into various constituent parts so that none of these parts would be by themselves able to challenge us. See, we were a paranoid superpower. We didn't want anybody to ever have the ability to challenge us like the Soviet Union did again. Now, that means that this conflict started decades ago. Decades ago, it was a concept driven by the imperative to keep Russia down, keep Russia weak. In 1996, I mean, everybody's like, well, the Russians interfered with our election in 2016. Maybe, maybe not, probably not. But we interfered in their election in 1996. We bought the darn thing. We stole it. We bragged about it. How many Russian newspapers have on their front cover, "We stole the American election"? None. Time magazine has a cover story in 1996 saying, "We bought the Russian election. We, America, we did it. We went in there and we got Yeltsin and he wasn't going to win the election. Zhuganov, the communist, was coming back. We didn't want the communists back, so we bought the election and we're proud of it. We're bragging about it." So much for democracy. Then something happened. This unknown, this former KGB officer, this St. Petersburg bureaucrat emerged from nowhere to become first the head of the FSB, the follow on to the KGB, then prime minister. The next thing you know, he's president. And everybody's going, Vladimir who? Putin. Who? Don't know him. Don't know anything about him. He emerged from nowhere. He was literally the accidental president. You want to know why he became president? He was the most honest man around Yeltsin at the time. Yeltsin was surrounded by something called the family. And the family was this, it was his immediate family, his daughter, son-in-law, but then all the oligarchs and all the people who rose up with Yeltsin pocketing billions of dollars, the most corrupt people on the planet. And they were circling Yeltsin like sharks because Yeltsin was old, Yeltsin was feeble, he was unhealthy, he was drunk. And they were waiting for Yeltsin to go away, and then they were going to move in. And Yeltsin knew what they moved in, he and his family, his immediate family, it was over. They were going to be arrested, they were going to die, it was going to be ugly. How does he save his skin and save Russia at the same time? Because I think Yeltsin was also starting to wake up that he had made a lot of mistakes. There was only one person in his entourage that he could trust. And that was Vladimir Putin. Because Vladimir Putin just wanted to serve his country. Not a corrupt bone in his body. Everybody goes, Scott, you can't say that. I know I can't say it because I never met the guy. But you know, the Consul General of St. Petersburg from the United States of America can say it. He met him repeatedly. And he said he's the most honest man out there, never takes a bribe, doesn't make any demands, simply listens to you, asks questions, and does his job. NGOs that went there, the leaders of non-governmental organizations met with him repeatedly. He's the only one who didn't slide a piece of paper across the table with a number on it, because that's how you did business in Russia back then. You sat down, they went to sleep as you gave your pitch because they didn't care. All they wanted was cash in an envelope to the number that they slid across the table. The only guy that didn't do that was Vladimir Putin. You won't find anybody that'll say, I received a number from Putin and I gave him money. They'll say, I heard somebody said that. Somebody thinks that happened. You won't find one person that says that happened, because it didn't happen. I'm not saying Putin's perfect. He's not. I am saying he's the least corrupt individual around Boris Yeltsin at a time when Yeltsin was looking for somebody to step up and save Russia, and Putin stepped up and he saved Russia. You want to know what kind of guy this guy is? When Yeltsin came up to him and said, I need you to become president, he said, not me, babe. I'm not, that's not my job. I'm not up to it. I don't want this job. And Yeltsin said, you got to take it. So he did. Yeltsin resigned, gave his New Year's address. Putin filmed his New Year's address. And then you know what he did? Imagine this. He got on a helicopter and he flew to Chechnya, where they were involved in a war, a horrible war. And his first act as president was to go visit the troops at the front and wish them a happy new year, shake their hands and say, you matter to me, you count. Guys, I know we're supposed to be peace activists, but I'm telling you, as a former Marine, that's one hell of a gesture. To have your commander in chief, this is his first act, come to the front lines and meet you and tell you, I got your back. And he wasn't just telling the troops that, he was telling Russia that. I've got your back. Things are going to get better. I guarantee it. And he followed up. He did. He delivered on the goods. Ask anybody who's in Russia today. Compare and contrast what's going on in Russia today with what's going on in the 1990s, and you can't say, oh, it's worse today. You won't find anybody who says that. The 1990s was the worst, and Putin has made dramatic improvements. You know who's irritated about it? The United States. See, we didn't want Vladimir Putin to be in power. That's why we bought Boris Yeltsin his re-election in 1996. And we've been conspiring to undermine Putin ever since. Again, I'm talking about the roots of the current conflict began way, way back from the very beginning. The moment Vladimir Putin became president, we said he has to go because he's not the leader we want for Russia. He's talking about a strong Russia. We don't want a strong Russia. We want a weak Russia. We want a Russia that's compliant to the West, not a Russia that says we're the equal, Russia that wants a seat at the table. And so from 2000 until today, we've been engaged in a policy of regime change, trying to remove Vladimir Putin from power. Now, we tried to do it the soft way early on. You know, George W. Bush brought him over to the Crawford Ranch and looked him in the eyes and said, I saw his soul. I don't know, George, if you're that good, you should have run for a third term because you got God on your side. But the point is, you know, Putin was just being Putin. You know, he wasn't exposing his soul. He was just being very blunt about who he is and what he wants for Russia. What he doesn't want is Russia to be challenging the United States on the global stage. What he does want is for Russia to assume its natural place in the world. And when I say natural place, understand it's one of the largest energy producers in the world. It's an economic powerhouse. We have people saying it's just a gas station disguised as a country. Really? How's that working, guys? I mean, if you're going to mock a country and call it a gas station disguised as a country, don't be an automobile stuck in the middle of nowhere with an empty gas tank, because suddenly that gas station disguised as a country's looking pretty relevant, pretty good. Again, we can go into the history of this. We could talk about the Obama administration, the reset. Remember the button, red button, yellow box, push it, everything's fine and dandy, misspelled word, doesn't mean what it wanted, didn't work, because it wasn't about a reset with Russia, it was about regime change. The reason why we went into a reset is because Putin had done his 2 legal terms under the Constitution, couldn't run for a 3rd consecutive term, so he did a flop with the prime minister, who was Dmitry Medvedev. Medvedev is now president, Putin's now prime minister, and we went, here's our chance. Suddenly we're all nice with Russia. Hey, Dmitry, looking pretty good, buddy. Want to go out to dinner, movie, a date with America? We like you now. We're your friend. We want to help you. Let me help you. And Medvedev went, well, what we'd like you to do is get back in the ABM Treaty. Not so fast, Dmitry, on the first date. Really, man. Calm down, chill it. No ABM Treaty. Not going to do that. Well, we'd like it if you didn't bomb Libya. Come on, buddy. Tee me, baby. No, we're going to bomb Libya. We're going to do anything we want. Don't you understand the nature of the relationship here? We just want you to kneel before us and bow like Yeltsin did. And Medvedev wasn't going to play that game. Joe Biden was vice president at that time. Joe Biden was heavily involved in trying to undermine Vladimir Putin's return. Imagine, if you would, in an American election, if a senior Russian, let's say Medvedev himself, flew to the United States, let's say it happens next year, 2023, and he meets with the Republican Party, the opposition, and he says, Joe Biden shouldn't run for re-election. It'll be bad for Joe Biden. It'll be bad for America. I don't care where you stand in politics. That should just irritate the living you know what out of you. A foreigner doesn't come to my country and tell me what's good for my country, tell me what's good for anybody. Get the hell out of my country. But Joe Biden flew to Moscow, met with the opposition, and said Putin shouldn't run for re-election. It'd be bad for Russia, bad for Putin. Because our policy was regime change. Putin ran for election, won, and he's back in president. But now he knows where the United States stands. We're trying to remove him from power. The Maidan revolution of 2014 was a coup d'etat in Kiev. You can pretend it's a revolution, but it wasn't. It started out as a peaceful demonstration. I'm not denying that the first demonstrators in Maidan in December of 2013 were I believe they were there to peacefully demonstrate against a decision made by the lawfully elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, not to pivot to the EU, but to stick with Moscow. And they said, you betrayed us. You promised we're going to EU. Hey, you know what? You have a right to demonstrate. Please demonstrate peacefully. And if enough of you come out there and you can get sort of this gravitas, maybe you can get him to change his mind. But the United States didn't want a peaceful demonstration. We wanted the violent overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych. So we went to our old buddies, the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the OUN-B, B for Bandera, Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera is one of the most odious characters in global history. He's a man who believes in the supremacy of the Ukrainian nationality. Now, that's okay. I'm proud to be American too, you know. But see, I don't want to go around and kill everybody because I'm an American. But Stepan Bandera didn't just want to kill people, he did kill people. The thousands of men who operated under his command are responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Jews. The massacre in Lvov, when the Germans went in 1939, Bandera's guys did it. The people who pulled the trigger in Babi Yar in 1941, Bandera's people. Ask the Poles how they feel about Wolin, a region in Poland where over 110,000 Polish men, women, and children were slaughtered by Bandera's people. You know what their specialty was? To go to a village, take everybody, put them in a barn, then set it on fire and sit back and laugh as the people burned to death. Any people who managed to get out, they'd shoot for fun because they really got off on this kind of thing. And they killed hundreds of thousands of Russians too. Now, Bandera is a Ukrainian nationalist, so he originally fought on the side of the Germans against the Soviets, and then later on, when the Germans didn't get him what he wanted, they put him in a sort of a soft prison, but they released him later on so he could fight again. Then when the Germans went away, he continued to stay in place and fight the Soviets, first as undercover force for the Germans, working for German intelligence, Nazi intelligence, I should be clear, a guy named Gehlen, the Gehlen organization. And then when Nazi Germany was defeated, we came in and we brought in Gehlen. We said, don't surrender, boss, just come over. You work for us now. We want your whole organization. I know you guys are Nazis. I know you committed war crimes, but we don't care. We want the people you control in the former Soviet Union, including Stepan Bandera, and they're going to work for us now. So from 1945 to 1954, we ran a covert war against the Soviets in Ukraine using Stepan Bandera's Organization for Ukrainian Nationalists. This war cost about 300,000 people their lives. How many Americans know about this war? Not too many. Not too many. 300,000 people, 200,000 Ukrainians, 100,000 Russians. Depending on your numbers, the Soviets lost between 8,000 and 30,000 of their own troops. So this isn't a small little, you know, Red Army faction thing, killing a person here. This is straight up war. And it went from 1945 to 1954, and it was funded by the United States of America, the Central Intelligence Agency. Now they got beat. And what happened to these people when they got beat? They fled to Europe, and then they went on diaspora. They went to Canada. They came here to the United States. In Ellaville, New York, 60 miles away from where I live, there's a park called Heroes Park. And in Heroes Park, they have the statues of Stepan Bandera, Roman Stukovich, and other neo-Nazi mass murderers. And every summer, they bring kids in who wear brown Nazi uniforms, and they parade around holding the photographs of these people up, praising their works. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Now, those words by themselves means, yeah, I say, glory to the Marine Corps. You know, Scott Ritter, you're a racist. No, I'm not. I'm just praising the Marine Corps. But when you say Slava Ukraina, as Nancy Pelosi did proudly on the floor of the United States Congress, it's like saying Sieg Heil. Now, do you want to tell me that Sieg Heil just means to victory? Sieg Heil. I'm just saying to victory? No, you know darn well what I just did. If I use those two words and my hand goes up, you know what that is. That's a Nazi salute and a Nazi cry. So let's not pretend that Slava Ukraina is not what it is. It's the cry of the Bandera movement. It is a cry of Ukrainian white supremacy, Ukrainian Aryan supremacy, and the arrogance of the Ukrainian nationalists that they have a right to kill the subhumans. Poles, Russians, Jews. We put them in power, ladies and gentlemen. 2014, we put them in power. Now, some in Congress got a little irritated about that. Starting in 2015, because we were providing hundreds of millions of dollars per year to train the Ukrainian army. We'll get to that in a second. But Congress went, whoa, wait a minute. There's a Nazi problem in Ukraine, a Nazi problem. Everybody knew it. It's the Bandera movement, the right sector, Sloboda, Azov battalion. So Congress put an amendment on the defense appropriations bill that said, you can't take our money and use it to train the Nazis. They used that term, the Nazis. In 2019, the Democrats wrote a letter to then Secretary of State Pompeo. They said, why aren't you labeling the Nazis a foreign terrorist organization? Because they're a white supremacist neo-Nazi group. Why are we supporting them? Why are we tolerating them? Congress knew exactly who these people are and what they represented until Russia went into Ukraine. And then it's like the memory's wiped. Jamie Raskin was one of these congressmen who signed a letter to Pompeo condemning the policies of the Trump administration for funding Nazis. But on April 28th, after he sent out a tweet praising the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and I support that, by the way, the Holocaust should never be forgotten, ever, never again. I believe that. Does Jamie believe that? He tweeted about it, but then he went on the floor of Congress and chastised a Republican congressperson. I'm not here singing her praises, Marjorie Taylor Greene. We all know she's not perfect, but she got up there and she was saying the right thing. We're funding Nazis. Why are we funding Nazis? And he said, what Nazis? You have no proof. Jamie, I have your name on a letter. You signed the letter saying there's Nazis in Ukraine, but they're still there. They haven't gone away. And the problem manifests itself over and over again. And what I'm trying to get at here, ladies and gentlemen, is that when we have this conflict in Ukraine, there's history. And you can either be on the right side of history or the wrong side of history. You can't be in the middle, especially if you're an American, because your government has aligned itself to the wrong side of history. If you're supporting the Nazis, you're on the wrong side of history. If you've been trying to undermine the Russians, overthrow the Russian government, push them into a corner by trying to invite Ukraine into NATO, even though you promised never to expand NATO, you're on the wrong side of history. Now, when I was back protesting the war in Iraq, I used to say that, first of all, I'm not a pacifist. I hope you guys know that. Don't condemn me, but I'm not. You want to fight my country, I'll kill every one of you. I don't believe in peace. I believe in war. But I believe war should be the last thing we ever do, that we have to exhaust every possibility short of war before we go to war. Every possibility. We should never send people off to die in combat if there's the potential to resolve this problem peacefully. You know who exhausted every possibility short of war before making the decision to go into Ukraine? Vladimir Putin. He did everything. Did everything. There was a negotiated peace in 2015, the Minsk Agreement. And it wasn't that Putin was trying to impose it on Ukraine. France and Germany came together in something called the Normandy Format, and they're the ones that took the lead and said, we need peace. We need to bring this issue to an end. Russia, work with us on this. And Putin said, okay, I'll work with you if you guys are serious about it. They said, we're serious. They said to the Ukrainians, all these people that you're trying to kill in the Donbass, these Russians, what needs to happen is you have to pass laws that protect their rights. Give them some sort of autonomy so that they don't fall victim to your anti-Russian laws that you've been passing. Again, right side of history, wrong side of history, go to the laws that have been passed by the Ukrainian parliament that ban the Russian language, ban Russian culture, ban Russian everything. Now remove the term Russian, insert the term Jew, and you have the same laws that Germany passed in the 1930s. Right side of history, wrong side of history. Putin's on the right side of history, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I'll take questions from you later on about this, but I just wanted to set this up, where I come from on the issue of what's going on in Ukraine today. I'm on the right side of history. That's my opinion. You're welcome to challenge me. Now, this war is a bad deal. It's a horrible war. I'm not sitting here saying, yay, Russia, kill more Ukrainians. It's the last thing I'm saying. I'm actually saying we need to be working overtime. We being the United States, since we started this conflict, we need to be working overtime to have an off-ramp to this conflict. And people say, well, things are so bad today. How could you possibly talk about a diplomatic off-ramp? There will never be good relations between the United States and Russia. I said, wow, I think I've heard this before. It was in the 1980s when I was in the Marine Corps. We called them the evil empire. They called us enemy number one. We almost went to nuclear war several times. We had hundreds of thousands of men on the border of Germany. They had hundreds of thousands of men on the border in East Germany. We were ready to go to war at a drop of a hat. Things were really bad. We had built new nuclear weapons. They had the SS-20 missile. We had the Pershing missile. And we were this close to global nuclear annihilation. I'm not joking. It was real. I was there. I know. You know what happened? We signed a treaty. As bad as relations were, we signed a treaty, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, and we worked with the Soviets to get rid of an entire class of weapons that were threatening Europe and the world with annihilation. I was involved in that treaty. I came in on the ground floor. One of the proudest things in my resume, it's sort of an ego thing, but I'm proud of it nonetheless. I was the first inspector on the ground in the Soviet Union. Number one, baby. It was an accident. Should have happened. When they recruited me, they thought I spoke Russian. I took Russian. It's on my resume, but I was in college. I was playing football and drinking beer, and Russian was not in the top of my priority. I did enough to pass, and it shows that I passed, but the headquarters Marine Corps said, we need Russian speakers. Ritter speaks Russian. Send them to the agency. I showed up, and they had a lieutenant colonel. We call him Pulemyot Kelly. Pulemyot means machine gun. And it wasn't because he was deadly with a machine gun. He was a Marine, but it was because he spoke Russian so fast. He was fluent. Even the Russians said, you speak Russian so well that we know you're not a Russian. You speak it better than the Russians do. You're grammatically correct every single time. And I had walked in as a first lieutenant in an organization that had nothing but majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels. I was literally a fish out of water. It was so bad that when I showed up, this is no joke, an Air Force lieutenant colonel came up and said, Lieutenant, coffee machine's over there. The implication was the only thing I was good for was getting coffee. Well, I didn't get him coffee because the general walked in at that time and introduced himself to everybody. And when the general left, this Army lieutenant colonel came up and said, who are you and why are you here? You understand that everybody here is the best expert on the Soviet Union and the United States military. They're all foreign area officers. They all have advanced degrees. They all speak the language fluently. They all have been immersed in the culture. Many of them have done tours in Moscow as defense attachés, spying. And many of them have served in the U.S. military liaison mission in East Germany, spying. These are the real guys, the real deal. These are the superstars of the Cold War. Why are you here? I said, I have no idea. I got orders. I was supposed to go to the Marine Corps and kill people, but they brought me here and I don't know why. And he said, do you want to be an inspector? I said, yes, sir, I want to be an inspector. He said, okay, we'll make you one. But then Pulemyot Kelly found out, tested my Russian, found out I was inadequate, called me an embarrassment to the Marine Corps, an embarrassment to the service. He fired me on the spot. He said, you're going home to the Marine Corps. We don't know why they sent you here. Long story short, being, Marine officers abhor leadership vacuums. We don't do well when we look and we say something needs to be done and nobody's doing it. We have a tendency to say, then I have to do it. And before they fired me, I wriggled my way into doing certain things like running counterintelligence for the entire organization. How that happened, you read about in the book. But the bottom line is I was doing something that I wasn't qualified to do, and I was doing it at a big level. I got the Assistant Secretary of Defense to do a special access program on counterintelligence polygraph program. I thought it was the coolest thing in the world, and the general decided it was the worst thing in the world, and he dissolved it. But in doing so, he said, I like your gumption. And then he said, I'm going to send you over to this new group of inspectors called portal monitors. Their job is to go to Vodkinsk, this Soviet missile factory 700 miles east of Moscow, where they used to produce missiles at SS-20, and we have to make sure they aren't producing them anymore. So you're going to be part of the team outside that factory. In June, they sent me there 14 days before the treaty was implemented with an advanced party of inspectors to help pave the way for the arrival of 30 Americans full-time living there. That's how I got to be the first person inspector in Russia, because when the clock ticked over on July 1st, the treaty's in force, I'm on the ground, and Colonel Kelly, I'm here, buddy. You're flying in on an airplane still. You're the second inspector on the ground. But I'm not that petty. Maybe. But what we did for the next couple of years was just fantastic. It was one of the best things in my life. I went from being a Marine who lived and breathed killing Russians to a guy who was working with Russians to get rid of the missiles that were threatening global peace. It was one of the most transformative moments in my life. And I loved every aspect of it. But the key takeaway here isn't just that it was a cool story. Hey, it's a cool story. But the key takeaway is that it provides a template on how we can do it, how we can repair relations with the Russia. You see, right now, we don't have active arms control. We have a treaty that nobody's paying attention to. They're not even letting inspectors operate right now. Relations are so bad. The INF Treaty that I was involved in no longer exists. And yet the weapons are coming back and they're providing the same level of threat. Everybody's talking about the potential of nuclear conflict. So how do we get out of this mess? George Santayana, American philosopher, said those who forget the lessons of history are condemned to repeat it. But the implication there is that the lessons of history are bad. Sometimes the lesson of history is good. Sometimes the lesson of history is a success story. And those who fail to learn the successes of history are condemned not to have the opportunity to repeat it. This book provides a template of hope on how the United States and Russia can move forward from this horrible situation we're in today. So I encourage people to buy the book. I'll sign it, etc. Now, Amar mentioned something, and I'll throw it out to you. He said people are interested in the conversation I had with Roger Waters. And I could stop right now and go straight to questions, or I can address this at this point in time. I'll leave it up to you. What would you guys want me to talk about, Roger? Everybody okay with Roger? All right, here we go. Me and Roger. And the reason why I want to talk about this is it'll introduce me to you. So when you start asking questions, you know a little bit more about me. In 1978, I was a senior in high school. And all the people that listened to Pink Floyd were not the people I hung out with. I was a Rolling Stones kind of guy. Some Girls was my album. And I hung out with the football team. We went up to the castle. We snuck beer up to the castle. We'd get out there in the break, chug a beer, go back to class. I was trying to get Betsy Ensign to go to prom with me. She did. So it wasn't a bad year. But all I was focused on was what was going to happen after high school. I wanted to go in the military. I was a child of the Cold War. I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to fight Russians. Fast forward, 1983, my senior year in college. I've just finished my final summer training program with the Marine Corps, officer candidate school. And I'm now looking at a piece of paper that says, if you sign this, you're going in the Marines. Now, this is something that everybody should think about, how a 17-year-old is so gung-ho because you don't know life. You don't know anything about life. You just want to go to war. But at 23, after you've experienced a little bit of life, there's a little bit of hesitation. I mean, I still played football. I love football. I still drank beer and I still liked girls, but I wasn't thinking about taking the girls to the prom. I was thinking about marrying them, starting a family of my own. And an album came out. It was called The Final Cut. It's a Pink Floyd album. And I put it on and I listened to it and it blew me away. Blew me away. Because it talks about war, the thing I'm getting ready to do. And I'm like, holy cow, this is serious stuff. Do I want to do this? And there's a song in particular called The Gunner's Dream. And, I'm not going to sing it, but it's basically about a tail gunner in a bomber that gets blown out of the airplane. And as he's falling to the ground, certain of his death, he thinks about why I'm fighting. Is it, why am I here? I'm about to die. Why am I doing this? And he thought about his mom going to his funeral and what he could say to her to make it okay. And he said, a place to stay, something to eat, somewhere old heroes can walk safely in the street. He said, a place where you can speak out about your doubt and fears, and no one ever disappears. You never have to hear the standard issue kicking in your door. He said, we can relax on both sides of the tracks. And maniacs don't blow holes in bandsmen by remote control. He said, everybody has recourse to the law, and no one kills the children anymore. No one kills the children anymore. I said, damn it, I can do that. I can fight for that. I signed the paper. I joined the Marine Corps. Fast forward. February 1991, Gulf War. I'm in the thick of things. I'm involved in the counter Scud operations. Scud missile is the Iraqi, Soviet-made Iraqi missile. They're firing them at us in Saudi Arabia. They're firing them at Israel. When they fire them at Israel, and then let's take the politics out of this, people. Let's just talk about humans. When they fired it at Israel, the first time they fired it, the missile hit the ground. It had some residual fuel in it. Some of the fuel is it's called IRFNA, inhibited red nitric fuming acid. It's red. And when the Israelis put everybody, they told them the Iraqis might be using chemical weapons. So all the Israelis built this special room in their home where they saran wrapped it, made it proof, and they gave gas masks to everybody. And the families were in there and they were panicked. Imagine this. You've got a gas mask. You're not properly trained on the gas mask. And suddenly you're told, alarm, alarm, alarm. You're in your room and you're putting the gas mask on yourself, and you have a baby, and you're putting the gas mask on the baby too. The missile hits. The first responders from Israel come in with their detectors, and they misidentify the fuel as chemical agent. So they don't lift the alarm. And the families are in this room, but the baby can't breathe. And the mother's sitting there holding the baby, and the baby's struggling. But the mother can't take the mask off because it's chemical weapons. And the baby dies. This happened over and over and over again. No one kills the children anymore, but they're dying. And I'm aware of that. So I need to get rid of these scuds. That's my job. Now, before I came to the war, back when I was doing the inspections, I was asked to go do an inspection. They called them radiation detection inspections of SS-25 missiles, which are big missiles that we thought could be hiding the SS-20s. Long story short, we'd go there, we'd set up this detector, we'd measure the radiation from the warhead, we'd determine whether it's one warhead, SS-25, 3 warheads, SS-20. That's not why I was sent. I was sent because I was a good observer. And I would observe these missiles up close, and then later on when we fly back, the CIA would have me draw sketches of it. The sketches were deemed to be so good that I was invited to a place called the Foreign Intelligence Division, United States Air Force. And they were building a radar that could be put on a B-52 bomber and fly over the Soviet Union and discriminate between decoys and the real thing. And they needed me to talk about materials, angles, all the things that are involved in radar absorption, radar reflection. And I did it. It was pretty cool. But then I left. Now I'm in Iraq and I'm taking a look. The Iraqis only had 19 launchers, but I'm looking at the reports and we've killed 60. Now, Marines aren't very good at math, but I'm telling you right now, if they only have 19, we've killed 60, something's wrong. There's decoys out there. They're using decoys. So I said, hey, they have this radar, and why don't I go in and inspect some of the sites that we bombed and reconstruct the radar signature of the decoy that's there so that we can bring in this bomber, fly it over, and we could discriminate between the real thing and the fake thing and take it out. And they went, that's a great idea, Scott. So I got sent to the SEALs, and we were going to go in and we're going to go to this one site that we had picked out where it looked like it was a Scud, got bombed, and we were training up to do the mission. Turned out it wasn't a Scud. It was a Bedouin tent at night. The silly Bedouins brought their sheep in, and the infrared signature on the Maverick missile picked up a long, what looked like cylindrical object. And when they fired the Maverick in there, it blew up, and they said killed Scud, but it was just a bunch of dead sheep and dead Bedouins. So they canceled the mission. But then I got invited to go to this other unit, these really special guys. You might have heard of them, Delta Force, the best of the best. Delta Force is up north in Saudi Arabia. They're crossing into Western Iraq, and they're hunting the Scuds. And they had found something that looked like a Scud. I was sent up to investigate it. It was a decoy. This is what I wanted, the decoy. I needed to get that decoy. So I flew in and I met with these guys. But as I talked to them, I noticed they're all a little bit down. They're a little depressed. Well, you see, the same night I arrived, that morning, every organization has its superstars. Delta Force had a guy named Patrick Hurley. Patrick Hurley was one of the original founding members of Delta Force. He went to Iraq to try and rescue people in Desert One. During the Panama invasion, he was the sniper that took out the Panamanian with the grenades that was going to blow up Kurt Muse before he could be rescued. Kurt Muse was a CIA agent being held by Noriega's people. Guy's a legend. And Patrick Hurley is out in Western Iraq with a patrol called Dart Patrol. And it's raining, the weather is miserable. And he's setting his guys in for the night. And he's up on top of a wadi and he slips and he falls 80 feet to the bottom. Now he gets up, he's feeling a little pain, and he goes in, he says, hey, I fell. And his medic says, sit down, we stabilize him. We think you might have a spinal injury. We need a medevac. The weather sucks. They say, who wants to fly this mission? A guy named Charles Cooper says, send me. Mike Anderson, another pilot, send me. We need medics. Otto Clark, send me. Eloy Rodriguez, send me. We need crew chiefs. Chapman, Mario Vega Velasquez, send us. And they flew in. Now, this is back in the day when you didn't have GPS on these helicopters. It was all done by time and direction. You had a map, you flew at a certain speed, a certain altitude for a certain time, hit a point, and navigate. They had to do dead navigation hundreds of miles into Iraq to find this place in the middle of nowhere. And they did it. The weather was horrible, sleet. You're flying low to the ground. You can't go high. The radar picks you up to get shot down. They're going in to rescue Patrick Hurley. The medic on the scene comes out and he hears the helicopter coming because you can't talk on the radio because the Iraqis will pick up the signal and they'll come in and they'll attack you. So he breaks an infrared stick, puts it on a string and spins it. And the pilots can see the spinning arc and they come in and they land. And they load Patrick Hurley up on the helicopter and they fly him back, but the weather's bad. The weather's really bad, horrible. So they're flying back and they get to the base, but it's fogged in, frozen fog. So they start making turns. Look, they ask them to turn on the lights. So they turn on the lights, but you can't see the lights. So Chapman and Vega Velasquez are leaning out the helicopter, looking for the ground, looking for the ground. They make one pass, they can't do it. Otto Clark and Eloy Rodriguez are holding Patrick Hurley stable because he has a spinal injury and they're making turns. So they're trying to stabilize him. Meanwhile, Cooper and Mike Alexander are trying to fly the airplane. They make one more pass and they hit the ground. Helicopter flips, kills everybody on board. Everybody's dead. That's why these guys are a little down when I'm coming in all my glee saying, let's go find these Scuds. Well, they worked with me and we did do that. But you know why we did it? To honor the sacrifice made by those 7 men. They died for a reason. They died doing something. They died so that no one kills the children anymore. Now, the war ended. We didn't get the Scuds, but I went on to the United Nations and I worked with Delta Force the entire time I was with the United Nations. They came in and we hunted down, we tried to account for the hundreds of missiles, hundreds or dozens of launchers. I worked with the helicopter pilots, Delta Force. By 1993, I was able to go to the director of the Central Agency and brief him that we could account for all the missiles. Well, the US didn't believe us. They didn't believe us. 1994, I'm in Israel. This is a big deal. Ehud Segei is the director of military intelligence for the Israelis. And while I'm trying to get the Israelis to help us with intelligence information, the Iraqis are making a move on Kuwait, 1994, October. Now he has to go to the prime minister and say, do we issue gas masks to the Israeli people? The last time they did that, old people and children died. Panic. And he's like, so he comes to me and he says, Ritter, you're the Scud guy. I have to go brief the prime minister right now. A decision has to be made tonight. Are there any Scud missiles left in Iraq? Is Israel at threat? And I said, no, sir. Mission accomplished. We accounted for them all. And he went and briefed the prime minister. They didn't issue the gas masks. No more children died. It's like one of the greatest moments of my life. I was so proud, because we accomplished the mission. We gave purpose to the sacrifice made by those 7 men. 2001, I've resigned from the special commission out of protest because the U.S. government was interfering with our work. And we're getting ready to go to war with Iraq again. We're getting ready to go to war with Iraq again. One of the things we're saying is that the Iraqis have Scud missiles. And I'm going, no, they don't. We got rid of them all. Mission accomplished. No more Scuds. But no one's listening. I go to the record store. And there it is, the final cut. But it's the new version. It's not on vinyl anymore. It's on CD. And I'm like, whoa, let me look at it. They had a new song on there, a new song. I said, okay, well, I'm going to listen to this song. It's called When the Tigers Broke Free. Blew my mind. It was dark all around. There was frost on the ground when the tigers broke free. And no one survived. And the Royal Fusiliers, Company Z. They're all left behind, most of them dead, some of them dying. And that's how the high command took my daddy from me. The guy who wrote that song was Roger Waters. Eric Fletcher Rogers was his father, Waters. In 1939, he was a conscientious objector. When the British were mobilizing for war against Germany, he said, I don't do that. I don't fight. And they gave him an exception. But by 1940, he realized what the scourge of Nazism was. He changed his mind. He went to the board and he said, I need to serve my country. And they took him and they commissioned him a second lieutenant in the Royal Fusiliers. On 18 February 1944, in the Battle of Anzio, Company Z was on the front line, holding off the German attack. When the tigers broke free, they were all killed. Roger Waters lost his father in war, never got to know his father. That made me think. I said, my God, Cooper had 2 kids. Mike Alexander, he had 3 kids. Otto Clark, 3 kids. Eloy Rodriguez, 3 kids. The high command took their daddy from them. They died in war. Why? Why did they die? It was supposedly to be the Gardener's dream, a place to sleep, something to eat, a place where old heroes can walk safely down the street, but that wasn't happening. In March of 2003, Delta Force went across the border again into Iraq, chasing phantom Scuds. The war wasn't over. It was all a lie. We didn't accomplish anything. Those men died for nothing. Those children lost their parents, their father for nothing. Cooper can't throw the football with Logan. Rodriguez had a daughter, Deanna. He can't walk her down the aisle when she gets married. They're gone forever. And then I take a look at what's happening today, the Cold War. Take a look at, we had hundreds of thousands of men in Germany. We're ready to go to war, and we brought that down. And yet today, we're back there cheering as we deploy more troops into Europe. USA, USA, cheering the troops. Now we come to the final song from the final cut, Southampton Dock. We disembarked in 45. No one spoke and no one smiled. There were too many spaces in the line. We gathered at the cenotaph and all agreed with hands on heart to sheathe the sacrificial knives. But now she stands on Southampton Dock with her handkerchief and her summer frock, clings to her wet body in the rain, knuckles in quiet desperation, knuckles white upon the slippy reins, she bravely waves the boys goodbye again. We haven't learned a damn thing. Not a goddamn thing. I'll take any questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott, so much. So we're going to take questions. Scott's talk reminded me of something that I should have said in the beginning. If we look around and we see all these paintings, they're done by a French painter named Diane Esmond. And when Germany invaded France, they confiscated Nazi Germany some of her paintings, including this one right here, the clown. Nazi Germany had confiscated that painting. So Diane Esmond's son, Victor Wallace, he's a member of this church, and they donated all of these paintings to the church for sale. All proceeds go to the church. So if anyone's interested, they could look around at the paintings. So yes, we're going to take questions. If anybody here in the audience has any questions, yes, just raise your hands and I'll walk over the cordless mic. So we'll go here first.
So thanks, Scott. I remember you well from the run up to the invasion of Iraq when I think you came and spoke here in May of 2002, warning people that there were no weapons of mass destruction. And then after the invasion, it was always interesting to hear people say, nobody knew there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. So thank you for your efforts then. And your amazing, very moving talk tonight. First of all, came in a little bit late. Can there are two different titles here. Can you just say a word about the books that you have available tonight?
Sure.
And what they're about. And then a friend of mine I spoke with who used to work closely with Ralph Nader, he's a left person of Ukrainian background. We've had a number of discussions about the situation in the war. And he wanted me to ask, and I think it's actually a good question, what do you have to say, what's your understanding of the Budapest Memorandum and the whole question of Ukrainian sovereignty and how that plays into all the other, I think, sometimes pretty complicated questions about this current war?
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, let's just start off with the two titles. Scorpion King is a history of America's addiction to nuclear weapons from FDR to Donald Trump. And Joe Biden just promulgated the national security strategy of the United States, inclusive of a nuclear posture. And anybody who says, well, this book's outdated, Biden's president, it's not outdated. Biden kept the same nuclear posture review that Donald Trump had in place, even though he campaigned on a promise that he was going to revoke it and pursue what's known as the sole purpose doctrine. The sole purpose of nuclear weapons is to deter other nations from using nuclear weapons against us. Instead, we have a policy of preemptive use of nuclear weapons in a non-nuclear environment that's very ambiguous, meaning you don't know when we're going to use nukes. Sort of the Nixon madman thing, Richard Nixon was trying to convince the North Vietnamese to come to the Paris peace talk. So he was talking to his chief of staff and he said, let them think I'm crazy. I'm crazy, Richard Nixon. I'm going to nuke them. We're going to nuke them. Let them think I'm going to nuke them. Let them think I'm so damn crazy that they're going to have to go to the peace table. I mean, that's insane, but it's true. That's how he operated. And gosh, Donald Trump at the United Nations, fire and fury is going to rain down on North Korea, threatening to nuke them. It's all right there in this book. It's a history of America's addiction to nuclear weapons. And I think I'm not going to accuse anybody in this audience of this, but when I go out amongst the people, they don't know anything about our nuclear policy. They don't even know what nuclear weapons are. They're not afraid of them. There's not a fear, an inherent fear anymore. They're just like, yeah, nukes, we got nukes. Nukes are good. Turn it into a parking lot, turn Iran into a glass, nuke them until they glow. Why? I mean, don't you understand what you're saying? Don't you understand what this is about? And they don't. That's why I wrote the book. And then the second one is Disarmament, the Time of Perestroika. It's about my experience as a weapons inspector. And I say in the Time of Perestroika, and this is sort of the an interesting part of the book. When I arrived in the Soviet Union in June of 1988 to begin the implementation process, Gorbachev was convening something called the 19th All-Party Union Conference. You guys say, well, 19 of them can't be that special. Well, the last one had been convened in June 1941 by Joseph Stalin right before the Germans invaded. They're rare. is a big deal. It's a revolution. He was basically trying to replace the communist way of doing business with this new democracy under the guise of perestroika. He was talking about elections, free elections. People could run who weren't members of the Communist Party. They were going to create something called the Congress of People's Deputies. And then that was going to create something called the Supreme Soviet. And then he would be the president. And it would be this new way of governing, this new approach to everything. And that was perestroika. And we lived in the middle of it. I was an eyewitness to the first elections ever held in the Soviet Union. I was there at the polling place watching it. Not because I was a monitor, I was just a curious inspector. I got kicked out real quick by the town mayor because a couple of drunk people showed up, said, "We can't let you see drunk people vote. You're out of here." But it was a smooth election. Watching democracy, come to life before you was fascinating. And then watching the Soviet Union collapse around you because perestroika didn't work was very depressing. And the interplay between disarmament and the collapse of the Soviet Union, that's what the second part of it, arms control, and the end of the Soviet Union. There's a direct relationship between it. I don't want to give away too much or you won't buy the book, but it's there. Look, I'm being facetious. Like every author wants their books to sell, but if I could, I'd give this book away for free because I think the story is so important. The story of hope, the story of history, the story of accomplishment. I mean, what we did was amazing. Building from nothing this multi-million-dollar facility outside of a missile factory. And remember I talked in the beginning, I talked about those majors and lieutenant colonels and colonels. You know who the heroes of the story are? Three captains who shouldn't have been there, but they were there by accident. And it was on their shoulders that much of the heavy lifting fell to save the treaty. And the treaty was at risk. There was a crisis, a missile crisis. And myself, John Sartorius, and Stu O'Neill, the three of us together were able to save the treaty. If it weren't for us, I firmly believe the treaty may very well have collapsed, and that would have been the end of disarmament. So read the book. It's a pretty cool book. Now, you talked about the Budapest Memorandum. What you're talking about, I believe, is the 1994 Budapest Agreement. That basically, here's the myth. The myth is Ukraine had nuclear weapons, and they gave up their nuclear weapons in exchange for an agreement that people would protect them from outside powers like Russia, who had nuclear weapons, that Ukraine, there was a guarantee of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. They're sort of right, but it wasn't that way at all. You see, Ukraine never had nuclear weapons, straight up never had them. The Soviet Union did. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, there were nuclear weapons on Ukrainian soil. And the Soviets said, if you even think about taking control, or the Russians said, don't even think about taking control of them, you don't get to have nuclear weapons. We own them. We have the passive codes that prevent them from being used. If you try to take possession of them, we'll kill you all. We're not going to let it happen. But they were on Ukrainian soil. And so Ukraine ostensibly, had possession of them. So the question is, how do you get rid of them? And so there was this whole negotiating process about how to get rid of these nuclear weapons. At the end of the day, everybody's saying Ukraine gave these up, and by doing so, they turned their sovereign protection over to the world. Guys, it was an embezzlement scheme from the start. Ukraine was leveraging these nuclear weapons, which they didn't possess, couldn't use. They were useless to them, but they were making a stink out of it, trying to get as much money as possible from the United States. This was an extortion racket from day one. And anybody who thinks other, read the history of it, read the negotiating record, see what the truth is. I'll debate this one till I'm blue in the face because I know I'm right. Ukraine is a corrupt nation then. It's an even more corrupt nation today. Nothing happens out of the goodness of anybody's heart in Ukraine, especially if you're a government official. You're on the take, you're taking money, it's all corruption. And someday somebody's going to answer the question of how $50+ billion of US taxpayer money was expended in Ukraine, where it went, to whom it went, what was accomplished with it. But that's what the Budapest. Yeah, I know. I understand what you're saying. Gosh, don't hold a coup. Okay, if you want to have territorial integrity and you have a constitution elected president named Viktor Yanukovych, and you're going to believe in constitutional rule of law, and that attaches to all the treaties you enter in, don't have a coup. Don't illegally overthrow the president with neo-Nazis come in and start murdering Russians. Don't stuff 150 people into a building and set it on fire and laugh as 48 of them die. Don't run into Mariupol and rape women in the streets, repeating what happened in Lvov and broadcast it and film it and brag about it. Because when you do that, I'm sorry, man, you lose sovereign rights. And Russia's going to act in a way Russia needs to act to protect itself. And that's what Russia has done. Let's not pretend that what happened between February 2014 and April 2014 was all, songs and flowers and dancing in the streets. It was rape. It was murder. It was torture by the Ukrainian nationalists against the ethnic Russians of Ukraine. And when you engage in that, I'm sorry, you can't sit there and say, oh, I'm protected by the Budapest Memorandum. No, you're not. You're a Nazi regime and you reap what you sow. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, thank you so much. I'm a pacifist, but I